So I remember where I was studying for Linux. I was studying for Linux a while back, got to study for Linux. Then all of a sudden, something came up about Python. Okay, I said, okay, I'm going to pivot to Python. I started pivoting to Python. Then something came up where, okay, I had I had a chance to get a CCNP. So, okay, let me pivot to the CCNP. And then at one point, I was trying to study for all three of them at the same time. So, needless to say, I ain't get down one of them. You know, that's my accent coming in. I ain't getting out of damn one of them there. So, welcome to Debt Free in IT. I'm your host, Mike. This podcast is for anyone who's looking to get into the IT industry, whether it's for a career change or you're just interested. I think you come to the right place. So today's episode comes from a listener's question. So basically that listener's question was that they're an older guy, so roughly in their 50s, and they would like to get into networking. They're looking for some good advice, currently studying for the CCST. They wanted to know if this was something that at their age that they should go ahead and pursue, or should they skip the CCST and go towards the cloud. So let's get to it. So the first thing I would like to do is take age out of the equation. So basically, all through my career, I never heard of anyone getting turned down because they was too old. So I've never heard of it. If you heard of it, please leave it in the comments. But I've never saw anyone that say they didn't get a job because they were too old. Because when you think about it, in the IT industry, basically, a lot of times it's not no manual labor like that. You know, if you're a networking, of course, you're going to rack and stack, but that's not every day. So a lot of times it's mostly sedentary. If you look at most people in IT, most of us, if you can look at me, you can tell I'm a little bit out of shape. So a lot of times, like I said, those jobs are mainly sedentary. So I've never saw anyone that say they didn't get a job because of their age. And then also with that being said, the main thing that most employers will be thinking about from my standpoint is, do you know the material? Can you solve that problem? You know, most of the time, if you're going for an interview, you're going for a job, a particular role. Most of the time, if you take it all, strip everything, strip that job description away, it goes down to just the basics of this employer has a problem and they want to know, can you help solve that problem? So as long as you're able to solve that problem, long as you know your material, long as you're a good candidate, long as you do good in the interview, a lot of times I can't see why, because of your age, that you would get turned down for a job. So at first, like I said, let's take age out of the equation because that's something I never ran into yet. You know, that's something I've never heard of from a lot of my friends. So the first thing is, like I said, we're going to take age out of the equation. So now that we got age out of the equation, I want to move on and talk about why I think networking still matters and why I think the CCST is a smart move for you. So looking at some benefits of networking and why I think it's okay to go ahead and go towards that CCST is basically we have to start from somewhere. So we have to start from somewhere. So if we're starting from somewhere, why not start with the foundation? So a lot of times that foundation in IT is basically networking. So everything builds off of that network. You can't think of no kind of industry in IT, networking, cybersecurity, server. Each one of those has a networking component. Even when you move into the cloud, you still have that networking component to the cloud. So if you're building a house, build that solid foundation. And what we're doing here, we're building our own house, and we're starting with that foundation, which is that foundation, in my eyes, is networking. So like I said, the first thing is, if we're going to start from somewhere with no experience, learn the foundation, which in my eyes, that foundation is networking. So next, moving on to the CCST certification. So when I speak about the CCST, I'm mainly referring to the networking track. So with CCST, there's a cybersecurity track. There's also a networking track and an IT support track. So with the CCST networking, it covers the basics of networking. So like I said, it doesn't go real deep like a CCNA might go, or an intro to networking course that's basically CCNA 1. It doesn't go as deep as that to where you're doing a lot of router configurations, a lot of switch configurations, but it does help to build that solid foundation that we're trying to build. And then from there, with the CCST, it gives you the option to where if you think you need to know a little bit more networking, then you can go on to the next level and learn more about networking. So it covers the basics, which is going to help you to build that foundation. That way, if we do decide to go into the cloud, a lot of the terminology and things you're going to already kind of grasp because of you're going to hear it mentioned a little bit in the CCST, especially when it comes to some networking protocols and things of that nature. And then another thing to add about the CCST is basically this certification, I like to call it a confidence builder. So a lot of times for most people, one of the biggest things that holds us back from taking certifications, studying for certifications, is basically the fear of failure. So a lot of times, like I said, I done failed plenty of certs. Probably going to fail plenty more certs. So basically, that's one thing when you get into this industry you can't really worry about. We're all going to fail. We all fail certs. Everybody in the IT industry who has a certification, if you talk to them, a lot of times they done failed a certification test before. So this CCST, like I said, it's an entry-level certification, but it's also a good confidence builder. So basically, once you pass this certification, you know in your head that, okay, I know the basics of networking. That gives you that confidence to now that whatever you've been reading, everything, the study guides you've been using, it lets you know that you fully understand those study guides, you understand that material enough to pass that certification. So that gives you a boost of confidence to where now we can go ahead and piggyback on that confidence and move on to the next level, or move on to more networking, or move on to more cloud. Quick pause. I'd like to introduce you to the Log Files. The Log Files is a weekly newsletter to help you start your IT career with practical advice and tips powered by yours truly. We launched it in the beginning of the year. It's packed with actionable advice, resources, and insights to kickstart your IT journey. The link is in the description as well as pinned in the comments, so don't miss out. Now back to the episode. So the next thing I want to cover is some steps to take after you get that CCST, because I'm confident you're going to continue studying for the CCST and you're going to pass that CCST. So basically, after you get that CCST, then you got another decision to make. So basically this decision is, okay, you got the CCST, which gives you a little bit of that foundation for networking. So now you got to think to yourself, do you want to continue down the networking? You want to do some more networking before you go to the cloud. So you could say, I want to go towards the CCNA. I like networking. But basically, like I said, you don't need a CCNA to go to the cloud. But like I said, this could be one of your options. You could go to the CCNA, go a little bit deeper into networking. And then after that, you could go into a Cloud Plus, which is a CompTIA, which is vendor neutral. Or you can go into one of the big three, AWS, Azure, or Google. And each one of those cloud providers, basically they're going to have a networking portion to their cloud product. So after you get that CCST, you got that networking foundation, then it's time to decide what's the next steps. Another step, if we don't want to go that route, another step that came to mind is, like I said, you could go a little deeper with networking, but not as far as the CCNA. And for that, I could only recommend Network Plus. Network Plus is going to go a little bit more broader than the CCST, going to give you a little bit more of that networking foundation. Then from there, you can decide to pivot on into the cloud, or my third option, add a little Linux to the system. So add your little Linux to it, because most of the time in the cloud, as you start doing your research on different cloud products, you'll start to see where you'll see Linux mentioned a lot. A lot of cloud products, a lot of times they utilize Linux. So this is where you could go that route. And then that way, after you get a little Linux under your belt, not saying that you got to go get a Linux certification, but if it was me, I probably would. But not saying that you would need to go out and get that certification, but you would learn a little bit of Linux and then start getting into the cloud. That way, when you get to the portions of the cloud that utilize Linux, it's not something that's foreign to you. So you're already familiar with it. So the premise, what I'm trying to do is get you to where when you get to that main product, that main destination you're trying to get to, I'm trying to get it to where you're already familiar with a lot of the aspects that goes into it. That way, it's all about just learning that cloud product then, because you're familiar with a little bit of Linux. You may not be the best at Linux, but you will be familiar with it. You understand some networking concepts. You understand the basics of networking. So from there, all you have to do is learn whichever cloud product you start to pursue. So in the end, my basic advice would basically be that since you're already studying for the CCST, I wouldn't stop, because if you stop now with the CCST, you're going to start studying for the cloud, then something's going to pop up to where you stopped that, and you're going to start studying for something else, then something's going to pop up and you stop that. Trust me, we all been down that road before. So I remember where I was studying for Linux. I was studying for Linux a while back, got to study for Linux. Then all of a sudden, something came up about Python. Okay, I said, okay, I'm going to pivot to Python. I started pivoting to Python. Then something came up where, okay, I had a chance to get a CCNP. So, okay, let me pivot to the CCNP. And then at one point, I was trying to study for all three of them at the same time. So, needless to say, I ain't get down one of them. You know, that's my accent coming in. I ain't getting out of damn one of them there. So, I ain't get the CCNP. I ain't get the Linux Plus, and I ain't get the Python. So what I'm saying is, I'm saying that to say this. Since you're already studying for the CCST, focus on that CCST. We're knocking out one at a time. So get the CCST. Then we're going to decide which track you want to go down. You know, do you want to go a little bit deeper with networking, or do you want to go ahead and go into the cloud, maybe add some Linux in there? You know, basically what I'm saying is knock out that one cert. Then we're going to move to the next certification or the next skill that we're trying to learn. And then, like I said, you hear me mention networking a lot because, like I said, I believe that's the foundation to everything in the industry. But with that being said, like I said, I know your end goal is to be in the cloud. So I would say the more networking you know, I think the better off you'll be. And then, you know, you may not necessarily need to go down the route and get a CCNA or anything like that. But I think the more of that networking you know, the more it's going to help you out in the long run. So that brings me to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found some value in this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook, you can follow me at DebtFreeinIT. If you have any questions, you can email me at debtfreeinit@gmail.com, or you can visit me at debtfreeinitwithmike.com. Other than that, I'll see you next week. Peace.